far in this series, we've made a cute Peeps-inspired bunny and used a brush to create slub-textured ice cream. In this part 3 of Halloweenish, we will put some fur on my cat, stack some cookies, and I'll show you how I made the candy corn colors. This cookie was easy to name, but you have to say it right. Toby! I know that a typical Halloween cat cookie is black, but I just could not resist making a cookie inspired by our own cat. If you're not a cat person, I apologize for the next 15 seconds. If you are, you will know what living with a sweet, inquisitive cat is like. It's joyful. What kind of cat gets in the guinea pig cage with the piggies just to watch them? Can you tell I wasn't even concerned? I went and got my camera. I guess there are two kinds of orange cats, crazy ones and cats like Toby. Okay, cookie talk. I applied a bit of soft peak piping consistency icing and am now scraping it onto the surface so that I can make cutouts in the middle of Toby's ears. Why I decided to do this with a scribe is beyond me. I have better tools for this application that I could have used. A brush, or the scraper I used for the hives in Humble Bee. I am using my preferred one consistency outline and flood. Side note, you can always tell when I'm using a flood icing because of the little rubber piece just under the knot on my bag. I use this to help avoid confusion. A friend of mine writes on her bags with a marker, but one, that would require additional mental processing to identify what icing I want while I'm decorating, and two, I find that the marker wipes off of the bag. So what's the point? I first outline the cookie and then each ear separately. I need to flood immediately if I have any chance of the flood icing melting into the outlines so that I don't have to see an outline. Which, if you've been around, you will know is so not my favorite. In the fight against visible outlines, every second counts. This is the first cookie that I have flooded in orange, and it is beautiful. I'll tell you in a bit how I made the colors I use here in Halloweenish. Let's just say a lot went into making this color. I am going to try out something I have not done before. I know this as the bear technique. Since in this series I'm showcasing texture, I want to be sure I get a nice, rough-looking, feelable texture. So I am using my soft peak here to achieve that result. The idea is to rough up the new icing, creating a look of fur or hair. Now, the most important step in ensuring the success of this particular technique is to be sure your icing is nice and dry, which is why I waited until the next day to attempt this method. I took a trip to Michael's craft store to find a brush that wouldn't break the bank, that had the ability to cover a nice amount of surface area, with fluffy bristles to nicely stipple the icing, but weren't so stiff that I risked damaging my flood layer in the event it wasn't as dry as I thought. This is a 3/8 inch Deerfoot brush. Looking at it, I can see exactly why it's called this. And at only $5.49, it seems to be perfect for me. In this aisle, I saw brushes that were almost $30. No way am I dropping that kind of money on a brush. I totally get it if you're an actual artist, but for what I'm using it for, I just need the bristles to hold up and not fall out. I washed the brush with soap and water when I first brought it home. It is completely dry at the start of my use here. That seems to be important to achieve the super extra texture. If the brush were damp or wet, it would melt my icing a bit and I'd lose the texture I'm looking for. When I'm done, I put my Toby cookie into the dehydrator set at 95 degrees to speedily start settling up that top layer of icing. Then I wipe off the end of my Deerfoot with a moist paper towel that I always have in a container at my side while I'm decorating. When you are decorating 28 cookies in separate videos, it's really hard to keep track of everything, and somehow I don't have the video of piping on Toby's face. Now let's talk about this icing. Because I really do not want to waste, and it actually helps me to give my color a good base, to make both the yellow and the orange, I started out with leftover icing from my freezer that I used in Humble Bee. For this orange, I used my honey-colored icing that I mixed in Icing Hives and Honey, which was made up of pumpkin orange, lemon yellow, mocha brown, gold, and ivory. Obviously, honey color wasn't really going to work here. So then I added more pumpkin orange and some more lemon yellow. Always consider your leftover icing before starting from scratch. It might not seem obvious that you can start off with a color like honey to make orange, but as you see here, it clearly worked. I did allow both the yellow and the orange to sit in my freezer for a week before decorating these cookies. While you definitely will want to allow your colors to develop, a week isn't really necessary. You really only need a day or two, depending on how dark you want your colors to be. I just find it easier on me if I break up my work into a couple of weeks. 1 week, I bake the cookies and make the icing. The next week, I bag the icing and decorate the cookies. I always use a dropper to add the water into my icing to get the consistency I need. This is my flood icing. What I'm looking for here is for it to fall off my spatula in a nice stream. And see that it will settle with just a little bit of help. I think we are there. I love to watch how the icing cascades right into the glass. It is so satisfying. For the yellow, I started with the leftover yellow that I made in making bee transfers. Added a little bit of the honey-colored icing and some extra lemon yellow. I take the expert's advice and always put my piping bags into a tall glass to hold the bag nice and open to receive my icing. I use a 12-inch piping bag, which I believe would be considered a medium bag. I dump the icing straight into the middle of the bag, attempting to avoid getting any on the top edge. You don't have to be careful, but in my experience, you don't want the icing to end up in an area of the piping bag that will allow the icing to get crusty and fall out, because it will get all over your table and it's annoying. So that I know what's what when I go to decorate, I tie 1 knot into my flood icing. Then I cut off the end of the bag to keep things neat and tidy, and then add on a colored rubber band thingy. I tie 1 knot into my soft peak, and I tie 2 knots, one on top of the other for my medium peak. Since I definitely need less medium peak icing in my bag, there's plenty of space for 2 knots. I do color my white icing, usually anyway. You will see in part 6 that I completely failed to color some of my white icing. I mainly color my icing to avoid color bleed. The thinking goes that when you add some white gel color to the icing, it makes it have the same properties as the colored icing around it. I don't know if you're able to follow that logic, but it does seem to help with color bleed. The inspiration for this cookie came from considering the 3D nature of the candy corn itself. It's not so literal though. I'd say it's a bit more interpretive. In my box of goodies given to me by my mother-in-law, I was gifted a set of shamrock cutters. I don't think these ones are 30 years old though. I'm pretty sure she ordered these on Amazon. This is a big cookie. I am struggling to get enough of the icing out in a nice flood. I'm also really concerned that because of how long it's taking me to flood this cookie, the icing will start to set up before I can get my scribe to it to help it settle the icing and fill in. Which is why I stopped to scribe a bit in the middle. I probably could have cut a larger tip in my bag, but I may have still needed the tip to be smaller at this point for other cookies in this series. So my thought here was to make each size in a different color and then stack them in candy corn color order. I flood the base, let it sit in the dehydrator for a quick 15, and then use my soft peak to pipe an outline. Since this takes a total of 13 real-time minutes, I'm running the video at 4 times speed. I can always tell when I'm starting to get tired in the middle of decorating. My mat starts to look a little less neat. Early on in my decorating video session, I'm pretty diligent about keeping the mat wiped off between each cookie. Here, it takes me extra time to notice the crumbs. I'm telling you, there are so many things to consider when making these videos. I'm shocked I can keep up with even half of the details. The best way to make a continuous line that follows a nice curvy route is to pull the icing bag up a bit away from the cookie. Somehow, this actually gives you a bit more control over where your icing lands. The bigger the curve, the higher you want to lift your bag. As with much of the details of icing cookies, you literally have to experience it to understand. But it is so cool when you finally achieve some measure of success and all of your prior tries count for something. It feels good. We are back to the next day. Does that make any sense? Anyway, these cookies are nice and dry, and I am now confident that placing additional weight on the top of that bottom icing won't damage it. I consider for a moment what icing I want to use to stick my cookies together. I decide that what makes the most sense is to use the same color icing that the underneath cookie is. So that if I put too much icing and some of it oozes out from underneath, it won't be noticeable. Also, I don't put the icing super close to the edge. I make sure to push down on multiple parts of the cookie to ensure that I don't have any tilty fresh going on. Yeah, I like to make up words. I'm going to go ahead and show you the alternate version I made, because I'm not sure which I actually like better. The traditional candy color or the reverse? Which do you like better? As always, any videos I mentioned today are linked in the description below. See you next time when we make a pressure-piped witch hat.
Next time on Kuny's Cookie Chronicles.
We are over halfway through our 6-part Halloweenish decorating series. Today I try and fail at a new technique and turn a spring cutter into a corny one.